The cold wind howled through the city streets as the crowd gathered around the most unexpected sight anyone had ever seen. Donald Trump, the president, stood face to face with a homeless black woman, her weathered hands clutching a tattered blanket as she shivered on the icy pavement. What happened next left everyone gasping in disbelief. Trump, dressed in his signature suit and tie, bent down, whispered something into her ear, and then did something no one expected. He handed her a piece of paper. Her trembling fingers unfolded it, and her eyes widened. The crowd leaned in closer, murmuring in confusion and amazement. But before anyone could get a clear look, Trump extended his hand to the woman, helping her to her feet. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. What was on that paper? And where was he taking her? The story begins months earlier, in a bustling city where dreams clashed with harsh realities. Janice Harper was a name few people knew, though many had passed her by. She had once been a teacher, inspiring young minds with her love for literature, until life dealt her a series of crushing blows. When her husband died in a car accident, the bills piled up. A few years later, a medical emergency wiped out her savings, leaving her without a home. She found herself on the streets, her only companions the stray cats that sometimes nestled beside her for warmth. Janice wasn't invisible to everyone, though. Some kind souls would stop by, offering sandwiches or spare change. Others ignored her altogether, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice her weary eyes or the small sign she held that read, "Just need a second chance." She had grown used to the world's indifference until one frosty December morning when everything changed. That day began like any other. The biting cold seeped through her thin layers of clothing as she sat on her usual corner, watching people rush past. She noticed the large black SUVs before she noticed him. Stepping out of one of the cars was Donald Trump, surrounded by his security detail. At first, Janice thought he wouldn't see her. He looked like a man with too many important things to do, but to her surprise, he stopped. His sharp eyes scanned her, and for a moment, she felt small under his gaze. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of curiosity. Janice hesitated. People didn't usually ask her that. She nodded, unsure what else to do. But Trump didn't move on. Instead, he crouched down to her level, ignoring the murmurs of his security team. "What's your name?" he asked. "Janice," she said, her voice barely audible. "What happened, Janice?" he pressed gently. Janice wasn't sure why, but she found herself telling him everything, the loss of her husband, her home, her dignity. As she spoke, Trump listened intently, his expression softening. When she finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen and a notepad, scribbling something quickly before tearing off the page and handing it to her. Janice looked at the paper, her heart pounding. The words on it didn't make sense at first, but the longer she stared, the more they sank in. It was an address, along with a note. "Go here. Your life is about to change." Her hands shook as she clutched the paper, her mind racing with questions. Was this a joke? Why would he do this? Before she could ask, he extended his hand to her and said those life-altering words. "You're coming with me." As the crowd watched in stunned silence, Janice's world shifted in an instant. She stood, unsure if her legs would carry her, as Trump guided her toward his SUV. The whispers of the onlookers turned to a low roar, and cameras began to flash. But where was he taking her? What was waiting at this trottoir? Address on that paper? And why had he stopped for her? A woman so many had overlooked. Janice stepped into the SUV, her heart pounding with fear, hope, and disbelief as the doors closed behind her. The car pulled away, leaving the crowd and her old life behind. The SUV's interior was warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Janice sat stiffly, clutching the piece of paper as though it were her lifeline. Her mind raced with questions, but her voice seemed to have left her. Across from her, Trump sat silently, his fingers scrolling through his phone. His security detail sat in the front, their eyes fixed ahead, offering no explanation. "Where are we going?" Janice finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Trump looked up and gave her a small, almost reassuring smile. to a place where you can start over. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise. Janice wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of hardship made her wary. What did he mean by start over? And why was he doing this for her? The SUV came to a halt outside a towering building with gleaming glass windows. Janice's breath caught as she read the sign above the entrance. Trump International Hotel. She looked at Trump, her eyes wide with confusion. "You're staying here tonight," he said matter-of-factly, stepping out of the car and motioning for her to follow. Janice hesitated. This had to be a mistake. People like her didn't belong in places like this. But before she could argue, one of the hotel staff approached, bowing slightly as Trump handed him a card. "Take care of her," Trump instructed. "She's my guest." The staff member nodded and gestured for Janice to follow. She glanced back at Trump, hoping for some kind of explanation, but he was already walking away, his phone pressed to his ear. Inside, Janice was led to a luxurious suite that took her breath away. The bed was massive, with crisp white sheets and pillows that looked like clouds. There was a fireplace crackling in the corridor near, and the smell of fresh flowers filled the air. For a moment, Janice stood frozen, afraid to touch anything. "I'll bring you dinner shortly," the staff member said, before leaving her alone. Janice sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day replaying in her mind. Was this real? Why would a man like Donald Trump, someone she had only seen on TV, go out of his way to help her? She unfolded the paper again, staring at the address. It felt like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. A tray of food was wheeled in, the aroma making her stomach growl. She hadn't had a proper meal in weeks, but even as she ate, her unease grew. What was next? Would this kindness last, or was it just for show? The next morning, Janice woke to a knock at her door. It was a woman in a smart suit, holding a tablet. "Mr. Trump sent me," she said, with a polite smile. "He wants to help you get back on your feet." Janice blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "What do you mean?" The woman stepped inside and explained. Trump had arranged for her to meet with a team that would help her find a job and secure housing. He had also set up a temporary fund to cover her expenses while she got back on track. The words sounded too good to be true, and yet, here they were, unfolding in front of her. The day passed in a whirlwind of meetings and plans. By evening, Janice felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in years. As she returned to her suite, she found an envelope waiting for her. Inside was a handwritten note from Trump. "This is just the beginning. Tomorrow, well, talk about the future." But before she could process the message, her phone rang. It was the hotel receptionist. "Miss Harper, there's someone here asking for you. They say it's urgent." Janice's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She hurried to the lobby, where a man in a disheveled coat stood, waiting. His eyes were frantic, and his voice shook as he said, "You're in danger. They don't want you to know the truth about why he's helping you." Janice froze, her mind reeling. What truth? And who were they? The man grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "You have to leave now, before it's too late." Janice looked around, her heart pounding. Was this man a stranger or someone sent to protect her? The extremes of hope and fear collided in her chest as she faced a decision that could change everything. Janice stared at the man, her pulse racing. His grip tightened slightly as he looked over his shoulder, scanning the lobby nervously. "You don't understand," he whispered urgently. "They'll come after you if you don't leave. You're not safe." "What are you talking about?" Janice asked, pulling her arm free. "Who's after me?" The man hesitated, his face pale. "Trump doesn't do anything without a reason. Think about it. Why you? Why now? They'll twist this into something bigger. You're just a pawn in their game." Before she could respond, the hotel's security guards approached. Their imposing figures cast long shadows over the marble floor. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, his voice firm. The man stepped back, raising his hands. "Just trying to warn her," he muttered before darting toward the exit. Janice watched him go, confusion swirling in her mind. "Miss Harper, are you all right?" one of the guards asked. Janice nodded slowly, her thoughts tangled. She returned to her suite, but the man's words echoed in her head. Was she being used? Did Trump have ulterior motives? The doubts began to gnaw at her newfound hope. That evening, as promised, Trump himself arrived at her suite. He entered with his characteristic confidence, but his demeanor softened when he saw her anxious expression. "You look worried," he said, sitting down across from her. "What's on your mind?" Janice hesitated, clutching the note he had given her. A man came to the lobby. He said aid him in danger. "That you're using me." Trump's face darkened slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. "People will always talk," he said, his tone measured. "They can't stand to see someone doing good without questioning it. But you have to ask yourself, does it matter why I'm helping you, as long as you're getting the help you need?" His words hung in the air, challenging her to decide. Janice wanted to believe him, but the man's warning had planted seeds of doubt. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Why did you stop for me that day?" Trump leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Because I've seen too many people fall through the cracks," he said. "I've made mistakes in my life, but I've also learned that everyone deserves a second chance. When I saw you, I thought, why not her?" Janice studied his face, searching for any hint of deceit. But his eyes held steady, and for the first time she felt a flicker of trust. "So, what happens next?" she asked. Trump smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, we're going to a press conference. I want the world to see what happens when someone is given an opportunity." The next day, Janice found herself standing in front of a crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed as Trump introduced her, recounting her story and pledging to launch a nationwide initiative to help the homeless. The words felt surreal, and Janice couldn't shake the feeling that she was living someone else's life. But as she stood there, the doubts began to fade. She looked out at the sea of faces, many of them skeptical, and realized that her story had the power to inspire. Maybe Trump's motives weren't entirely selfless, but his actions were making a difference, and that was something she couldn't deny. Just as she began to feel a sense of purpose, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. The same man from the hotel lobby burst in, shouting, "It's all a setup! She's being used." Security quickly subdued him, not before the crowd turned its attention to Janice. Whispers rippled through the room, and the reporters' questions grew sharper. "Is this genuine, or is it just a publicity stunt?" one of them called out. Janice froze, her confidence wavering. She turned to Trump, whose expression remained calm. "This is your moment," he said quietly. "Tell them the truth." Janice stepped forward, the weight of everyone's gaze pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I don't know why he chose me," she began, "but I do know that I'm standing here today because someone gave me a chance when no one else would. And that chance has changed my life." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The man's shouts faded into the background, and for the first time, Janice felt like she had reclaimed her story. Whatever Trump's reasons, she had found hope, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. As the press conference ended, Janice walked out into the sunlight, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time,